question on class.
我们有一个问题是就讲到我们所要提供的课程。
Class has been developed on the 5 purposes.
这一系列的生命课程是按照我们讲的5个目的设置的。
The purposes come from the Great Command and the Great Commission.
那这5个目的是从大诫命跟大使命提出来的。
Both are found in the book of Matthew.
从马太福音里面可以找到这些经文。
Matthew 22 and Matthew 28.
马太福音22章，马太福音28章。
The Great Command.
大诫命。
Love God.
爱神。
Love your neighbor.
爱你的邻舍。
The Great Commission.
大使命。
Preach the gospel.
传福音。
Make disciples.
做门徒。
And bring people into the Christian fellowship through baptism.
要受洗带人信主。
Worship.
敬拜。
Ministry.
事工。
Evangelism.
传福音。
Fellowship.
团契。
Discipleship.
还有做门徒。
5 commands.
5个命令。
So in class 1, we teach fellowship.
在我们讲到101课程的时候，就讲到团契。
It's the membership class.
这是我们的会员课。
Class 2, we teach what it means to be a serious student of God's Word.
在201的课的时候，我们是要教导你如何有一个很认真、很诚恳的态度做神的门徒。
This is the beginning of discipleship.
这是做门徒的第1步。
Class 3.
然后第3堂课。
It's what we're discussing today. It's the ministry class.
就是我们今天所提到的事工的课。
We're commanded to serve one another.
我们命令我们要互相服侍。
And class 4.
第4堂课。
We are going to try to plan for the first week in October to do this together.
我们现在的计划是10月第1个星期推动的最后1堂课。
And class 4 teaches mission.
那是讲到宣教。
It is the purpose of evangelism.
那这个是我们传福音的目的。
There is not a 5th class.
我们并没有一个第5堂课。
But the missing purpose is worship.
你知道我们有一个目的没有提到的，就是敬拜。
But worship is the foundation of all classes.
敬拜是所有课程的基础。
The key to worship is a surrendered heart.
主要的敬拜最主要的中心就是降服在神面前。
Worship means I will always say yes to God.
敬拜就是对神永远说我愿意。
Jesus said, "Please don't tell me that you love me. Instead, obey my commandments."
耶稣说，不要只是告诉我说你爱我，要做我告诉你的事情。
Worship is truly an active life of participating in the will of God.
敬拜就是在你生命当中做神要你做的事情。
Now, in my church, when it was small, I only needed to have class number 1, the membership class, twice a year.
我以前服侍的教会很小，1年只需要教2次101的课。
And at that time, I would always have 20 new members at each class.
那个时候每次上课大概就是20个新人会来。
But soon the church began to grow.
很快的教会就开始成长。
So I would have the class 3 times a year.
所以我们开始1年教3次。
4 times a year.
或4次。
When I left my church, we were having it 10 times a year.
当我离开那一个教会的时候，这个教会是1年教10次的101的课。
I didn't have it in August because everybody was on vacation.
8月的时候我不教，因为那个时候大家都去旅行。
And I don't hold it in December because of all of the holidays.
然后12月我也不教，因为假期太多了。
At Saddleback, we do it 12 times a year.
可是，在马鞍峰教会是1年12次。
It's always the second Sunday of the month.
永远都是第2个主日。
Classes are 4 hours in length.
每一堂课是4小时。
No one ever complains.
大家并没有抱怨。
All of the text and student materials are available to you.
所有的这些材料，我们都可以提供给您。
Now, the first class that you start is class 1.
第1堂课你要开始的，这101的课。
When those activities are going smoothly, maybe 6 months later, or maybe even a year later, start class 2.
当你们教会开始推动101的课，当所有的课程都很顺利的进行，也许6个月以后，你才开始推出201。
In my case, I started class 1, and then 3 years later, I started class 2.
在我的情况，我推出101以后，我等了3年才推出201。
My church had a lot of tradition, and my elders were very difficult.
我以前的教会有很多传统，而且我们的长老也挺固执的。
But if you go slow, and if you're patient, you will always win the day.
可是你要有耐心，你也要愿意等候，那你会发现你做的事情就会成功。
The wind carves great mountains if you just let it blow over time.
如果你让这些大风常常去吹，这山总是会被它吹有痕迹。
2 years later, I started class 3.
2年以后，我再开始301的课，
And a year after that, I started class 4.
我又再等了1年才401的课，
That's 8 years.
所以总共花了我8年。
But I never lost a member of my church.
可是在这个中间，我的会员一直没有流失过，
And my elders stayed with me through the whole process.
我们教会的长老也一直与我同在。
I was young when I began.
我开始的时候，那时候很年轻的，
And even though the elders grew older, one day it was true that I was their leader.
所以虽然说这些长老年纪都比我大，可是终究有一天，我还是会成为他们的领导者。
But this takes time.
不过这需要时间的。
When I left my church, I did class 1 10 times a year.
所以当我离开我那教会的时候，我们教会1年教10次101的课，
Class 2, 8 times a year.
201的课教8次，
Class 3, 6 times a year.
然后301的课1年教6次，
Class 4, twice a year.
然后401的课1年教2次。
There was about 1,000 people in my church.
那个时候我们教会大概有1000人的会众，
Each class will grow smaller in size.
你会看得出来每一堂课的人会越来越少。
Don't let that discourage you.
你不要让这个来让你觉得很失去信心、灰心。
Sometimes pastors say, well, I want every member of my church to go through all 4 classes.
有的时候牧师认为，我希望说所有的会员都能够上所有的课，
Don't do that.
你这不要这样做，
It's very unnatural.
这个是很不自然的。
If I take a pile of sand and I put it onto a table,
如果我拿一堆沙把它放在桌上，
and maybe I mix the sand with water,
也许沙里面我再掺一些水，
so I can grow it up and make a big square on the table.
也许加了水以后，我可以把它固定成一个形状。
What will happen over time?
可是过一段时间，你知道会怎么样吗？
It will fall and take the shape of a mountain.
你会发现，时间过了一段时间，它会慢慢就是沙会流下来，成为一个山的形状。
The living church of Jesus Christ shapes itself in the same way.
一个活的一个神的教会也是这样子的一个形成。
Many people look for Jesus.
大部分的人来找耶稣，
A few become members.
有一部分的人来认识耶稣，
Some read their Bible.
有些来念圣经，
Some have a ministry.
有些有事工，
And a few will share the gospel of Jesus Christ as missionaries.
那有一部分的人他就会成为宣教士。
The only way to beat that problem is by adding more people at the bottom.
如果你想解决这个问题的话，就是下面的人得增加。
When I was a boy, I was at the beach with my father.
我还是个小孩的时候，有一次我跟我父亲到海边去玩。
And I told him I was going to build a big mountain of sand.
我告诉我父亲，我要做一个很大的沙丘。
So I gathered as much sand as I could and began pushing it to the top.
所以我抓了很多的沙，一直想把它往上堆，
It got to be very tall,
变得很高。
but then it would fall down on itself.
不过很快又崩溃下来了。
My father came with a shovel,
我父亲拿了一个很大的铲子，
and when he added more sand at the bottom, the mountain grew taller.
当他把这些沙一直聚集在底下的时候，我可以越堆越高。
This is the same for growing a church.
你要一个教会增长也是这样子，
You cannot focus on sending missionaries.
你不能专门注重是送传教士出去，
That is our goal and that is our godly dream.
那是我们的目的，也是我们一个神圣的目标。
But if I reach many people for Christ in my community,
可是当我从我的社区里面招了很多人来认识耶稣，
over time, as my church grows, I will send many more into the mission field.
时间这样子慢慢过来，我是可以送大量的人出去宣教。
Church growth is balance.
你真正的教会成长是重于平衡。
I love Chinese circus.
你知道我很喜欢中国的杂技，
Every year, I go to a Chinese circus and I watch all of the performers do tricks.
每年我去看那个杂技的时候，我就觉得他们做的很多事情是非常
I
让我
like the
惊
guy
讶。
who spins those plates.
我看到有的人转盘子，
He reminds me of a pastor,
他让我想起来，他就像一个牧师，
and he's going to start 4 classes.
他要开始4堂课，
So he starts class number 1.
所以他就开始转第一个盘子，就是101的课。
And once he has focused his attention on it and it's spinning quite rapidly, now he can start class 2.
所以当他看到这个盘子转得非常顺利也非常快的时候，他就才再转到下一个，开始转第2个盘子。
But he looks back at class 1.
可是他还是回去看他第1堂课，
It's slowing down.
开始慢下来了，
He has to give it some attention.
所以他得回去再转一下。
Class 2, some attention.
第2堂课也再转一下，
Now he can start class 3.
然后他可以才开始第3堂课。
But once you start a class, it must never stop.
可是你一旦开始了，你不要停。
So, every month, you give a little attention.
所以每个月你都要给他一些，要让他转。
Soon you're ready for class 4.
很快的，你就要开始转第4堂课。
Now, it's very difficult because he's running back and forth all the time.
这个是非常困难的，因为你想象你得前后这么跑。
But when all 4 plates are spinning, it's easy.
可是如果4个盘子都一起转的时候，它其实不是太困难，
No problem.
没有问题的。
You can do it easily over time, but it's very difficult to start.
你一旦开始了以后，你可以让它维持，难的就是要让它开始。
Now, there's one church that took 20 years to establish the 4 classes.
有一个教会花了20年才设立这4堂课，
Can you imagine that?
你能够想象得出来吗？
Saddleback Church.
就是马恩峰教会，
The first class was in 1979.
第1堂课是1997年，
We never had class 4 until 1999.
一直到1999年我们才开始401的课。
Don't worry.
不要担心，
If you are going to become a big tree, it will take you 20 years.
如果你要成长成为一个大树，你需要20年。
But a mushroom can be grown in 20 hours.
不过如果你只是要长个蘑菇，那就只需要20个小时。
Many churches are mushroom churches.
很多教会是蘑菇教会，
They want everything fast.
他们希望很多事情都可以很快的发展。
Don't worry.
你不要担心，
It is not a program. It is not a project.
这个不是一个项目，也不是一个节目，
It's a life.
这是你的生命，
Enjoy your life.
你要去享受这个生命。
If you enjoy your life and enjoy your relationships, the classes will come over time.
如果你喜爱你的生命，你热爱你的生命，这些课程会一项一项建立的。
If you become very upset and if you work really hard, it doesn't help.
如果你常常觉得心里面非常沮丧，然后要常常这样子很花力去的做，这个是做不来的。
Slow, steady development over time is the only way to keep everything working smoothly.
缓慢可是很稳定的发展，就会帮助你发展这个系列。
When a rocket ship takes off, it burns 80% of its fuel in the first 5 minutes.
当一个火箭往上冲的时候，80%的燃料就已经在前5分钟烧完了，
And then it can orbit the Earth very easily.
然后他一到了外太空，他就可以很顺利的绕着这个地球旋转。
In the beginning, you will work very hard,
所以一开始的时候，你会发现你花很大的力气去做，
but your life soon becomes very easy.
可是你做了一段时间以后，它就会开始很顺利。
Class is a skillful art that must be developed over time.
所以发展这生命课程，其实是一个很有技巧的，你需要花时间，愿意等待让它发展。
So in the classes, I learned fellowship, discipleship, ministry, and evangelism.
在这4堂课里面，我们学到了团契、事工、宣教，还有门徒训练。
The average member of Saddleback Church takes 30 months to complete the classes.
在马鞍峰教会，平均是30个月，那一个会员才会把这4堂课上完。
Perfect.
这个也很好，
You don't have to go fast.
你不需要上得很快，
You just have to go.
你只要不停地走，
So don't worry.
所以你不要担心。